The 49ers seemingly have their backs against the wall this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which feels like about as much of a must-win game as you can have this early into November. It's a litmus test to say the very least. And I would say also any chance at the first overall slot going into the playoffs, that number one seed is also potentially on the line this week, this early into the season. We're going to discuss the Jaguars. We're going to discuss the Chase Young trade. Really, it's almost like Sunil's been in a time machine because he's been gone. So I've got to catch him up on all the happenings. And then we get his reaction as if he's hearing it for the first time, because he essentially is. So we're going to talk about a ton, and we're going to do it all next. All right. Welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. And it's not Tuesday, but I do have my guy, So Real Sunil, back in the building. What's up, Sunil?
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Look, whenever Jesse needs to switch around something, whenever it's like, hey, this is not going to work, we need to get a better host in and all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
It's always this show that gets moved. So I just want you guys to understand. I love you, but I understand my place on Last Second Sports.
Wow.
Bottom of the totem pole.
Jeez, man, that's so brutal. Yeah, it is funny, though. You know what's interesting to me is it seems like, so I go way out of my way. Anybody who doesn't know, let me tell you how Behind Enemy Lines works, okay? I schedule them out before the season even starts. And then I circle back around with content creators and say, hey, are we still good for next week? The week prior, usually. What's been happening the last few weeks is people have either fallen out and I had to find somebody quickly, or they're like, no, we're no longer good for that time. And so I'm only going to stream a certain amount of times throughout the week. My time slots are my time slots. So I'm like, all right, well, if you're not good this time, how about this time? Or how about this time? Or how about this time? It seems like they like Sunil's time slot. So they're just taking it from him. I don't know what to say.
I don't know if it's about they like my time slot or that's the only one offered.
Oh, because no. I'll show you text messages.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I got to say this, too. There's no ring on this finger, Sunil, so I'm not committed. Golly. Hey, I will say this, though. You had a hell of a lot better time than we did here. I'm sure you had a great time traveling abroad, enjoying your life, living your best life. The 49ers, on the other hand, have not been living their best life. I'm not sure how aware you are, but they did make a move, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this Trent Williams thing is starting to linger a little bit. And I know that Trent Williams was hurt before you left out of town, so you're definitely aware of that. Mm-hmm. But also, the expectation was he'd be back as soon as the bye week was over. Now, he may be back tomorrow for practice. We don't know for sure, but Kyle Shanahan did admit that this ankle injury has lingered longer than he expected. Are you concerned about Trent Williams maybe heading into the rest of the season? And do you think this team can win this week in particular without Trent Williams?
So I think it's safe to say that you could pencil in Trent Williams to miss 1 or 2 games throughout the season. That's kind of been his history since he's been here. So if it was just Trent Williams on his own, do I think that we can cover that? I would say yes. The problem is it's the whole left side, right? Because Aaron Banks is also nicked up. So you want to have one or the other at least there, because those are our 2 best offensive linemen by far, right? Obviously, Trent Williams is one by far, but Aaron Banks has been a very solidified, offensive lineman for us since last year, where he just stepped in and kind of that left side has always been the strongest for us. So him being nicked up as well is where the issue is. Now, do we know, is Aaron Banks playing? Is he back?
Aaron Banks is for sure not playing. He hasn't missed any games, but he's got turf toe, so they expect him to be out a few weeks, it sounds like.
So I didn't know if I knew they said that, but I didn't know if the bye week was part of those weeks. So it looks like maybe the whole left side is going to be replacements, right? I think they're going to put Feliciano and probably More, right?
And that's assuming Trent misses. It's not a guarantee. He may practice tomorrow, but he's not going to be 100%, it sounds like, if he does play either.
And if he wasn't 100%, I would much rather him rest. Because ultimately, to answer your question, do I think that the 49ers could win without the left side, with the left side being all backups? I think yes, in this situation, right? I'm not saying that Jaguars defense is terrible or that defensive line is terrible, because it's not true. They have guys that could rush the passer, but I do think that with Debo coming back, with CMC, they're coming off of a bye, you can get a little bit more creative in your offense to overcome maybe some of those deficiencies. So I would rather Trent Williams get all the way healthy versus having a lingering injury, because I don't think we win a Super Bowl without him. I don't think we go deep into the playoffs without him. So ultimately, that to me is the main goal. So get him as healthy as possible. If he has to sit out, because I do think that they can beat the Jags with a little less than offensive line.
Yeah, I want to point this out, though. 49ers Throwback says we can't run the ball without him. That has been a little bit of a trend, and that is worrisome because the Jacksonville Jaguars, their front four doesn't get after the quarterback a ton, but they are very good in the run game. Jaguars defense as a whole is very good in the run game. So you take away Trent, I mean, you pretty much can guarantee you're probably not going to run the ball effectively. So now you're in a situation where you're going to have to win through the air. Can that be done? Is that ideal? I don't necessarily know about that. So that it gets dicey without Trent. Mm-hmm. And I agree. I would much rather him be healthy. I just don't know. It sounds like it's potentially the same ankle that he had surgery on, the one that gave him troubles down the stretch of 2021 that he injured in the Green Bay game and then tried to play into the NFC Championship with. If that's the case, this thing may not ever be 100%, at least not the rest of the season. So it becomes a pain management thing. I don't know. Less than ideal, I will say.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a couple of players on the offensive side that if they got injured would significantly impact the offense. And Trent Williams was at the top of that list, right? So unfortunately, he's the one that is there. But ultimately, look, it's not going to be an excuse at the end of the season, Jesse. This team has enough talent to where the loss of even as great as Trent Williams is, they should still be able to win games. The offense should still be looking much better than that. And it's unfortunate that, I saw Fernando was the one who put the comment there, but why can't we run just because Trent's not there, right? There's still 4 other offensive linemen, 5 with the backup. This is still a run first team. So every single offensive lineman that was brought into this team was meant more for their ability to run block than it was to pass block. So the fact that we can't run the ball, I think it's a deeper issue than Trent Williams being there or not being there.
Yeah, most certainly. It seemed Kyle Shanahan said after the Cleveland game that essentially he wasn't prepared to miss the players that they were missing. It's an odd thing to say as a head coach. Right. So have you not been prepared the last couple of weeks without those players? Does it come down to this team has to be fully healthy to win? And if not, you're not going to win. Where do we draw the line? Because no team is ever fully healthy. Injuries are going to happen. Shoot, I remember the Aaron Rodgers Green Bay team that won the Super Bowl. They had like 11 players, starters on IR going into the Super Bowl, and then lost Woodson in the Super Bowl and still won. sometimes you just got to be able to make it through. And right now, this team, when they lose a player or two, they just don't look the same, and that's unfortunate.
I agree. It's indefensible for a coach, and even though it's my coach, to say, hey, we didn't have contingency plans for these players to go down, because you should have contingency plans for especially a coach that says, I don't know if we're going to be alive on Sunday, to not have a contingency plan for players not being there. This is your line, Kyle Shanahan. We don't know what's going to happen on Sunday, so you should have a contingency plan for everybody being out.
I would think so. It sounds like he's ready for the zombie apocalypse. Maybe he should be ready for this. Brother Bob also, see, Brother Bob, he acts sometimes like he doesn't like Houston Neal, but I do find it a little interesting that he chose to go on vacation at the same time you went on vacation. He decided to miss shows the same time you were going to miss shows. Maybe Brother Bob actually likes you more than I do, apparently, because I keep moving you around from day to day. So maybe that's where it's at. But he does want to know, are you still a Shanna stan?
First of all, Brother Bob, you wouldn't respect me if I wasn't still a Shanna stan, man. There's no way that you would be donating your $1.99 to Jesse week after week unless you can make some kind of Shanna stan comment to me. So absolutely, not just because I am Brother Bob, but I will never say anything different so that you can still come at me, pause, about Kyle Shanahan, my friend.
Yeah, there you go. Sunil's stubborn. He comes back and says, if Purdy throws more interceptions, do we panic even more? I don't know. I think it really, what it comes down to with Purdy for me is what is your expectation of him? If you thought he was a top 5 quarterback and was going to be perfect his whole career, then yeah, I'm sure you would panic more. I look at it and say this team wasn't designed to win on his right arm. Not now anyways, not this early into his career. They thought that he would be slightly better than Jimmy at this stage in his career, and then, eventually grow into that full-time franchise quarterback. But there's no way that they expected him to carry this roster, this cast of characters, players like Debo and CMC and Kittle and Ayuk, and a great defense. There's no way they expected that. If they did, then they had the wrong expectations. So the 49ers around him need to step up. That's what needs to happen. Raymond Clark says, no one is ever prepared for injury. Overcoming the inevitable is what championship teams do. This team needs to get their groove back ASAP. I agree. This is a great comment.
And to Ramon's point, even though I can't say, I think it's a stretch to say the confidence is wavering, because I don't think that the confidence is wavering, but the groove, quote unquote, whatever that groove is, isn't there. This team isn't looking like they're having as much fun as they usually do. They're not. It looks different on the field, and obviously you're having way more fun when you're winning than when you're losing. But something does seem off, and it's kind of, it might be the silver lining that the bye was when they're playing like their worst football of the year. Hopefully they could figure and tighten it up, and obviously we know they're making changes. Maybe some cosmetic, hopefully some that actually lead to some results, but it does seem like they needed a reset, and hopefully the trajectory is moving upwards now.
And let me know, is it Raymond or Ramon? Because I want to get that right. I appreciate you donating, and I love the comment, but you got to let me know, because we could have easily called you Ramon and your name's Raymond. So there's also that, but I appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about expectations past the bye week. 49ers coming off of, this is an interesting season. It really has been a tale of two different seasons across the board. Offensively and defensively, it all fell apart at the same time. They had their best game of the season by far against the Dallas Cowboys. And then I think followed it up with their worst game of the season, playing against the Cleveland Browns. Mm-hmm. And then they followed that up with 2 more losses. I'm not quite sure what this team is, but this week against the Jaguars, we're going to get a good feeling, because the Jaguars are a good team, also coming off of a bye. We're going to figure out where they stand. If they're able to win, great. Everything's good. They're back on track. If they lose, things get a little bit dicey, a little bit sketchy. What are your expectations post-bye for this team?
So, expectations for the rest of the season and expectations for this game might be a little bit different, because if we just go straight stats, Kyle Shanahan, after a bye, his team's winning percentage is double what it is before a bye, right? I think it's close to like 63% of the games after a bye he wins. It's like 32% he loses. But it's interesting to me, Jesse. I looked up the stat as far as what's Shanahan's record in the game right after the bye, and it's a coin flip. He's 3-3.
Oh,
So you can't really, usually that stat. I remember when Belichick was, being Belichick, like after a bye, he's like close to undefeated. Andy Reid, I think, is the same. Coming out of a bye, they're close to undefeated. You give these great coaches that much time to prepare for a team, they're pretty much super hard to beat. I do think Kyle Shanahan is a great coach, but that stat isn't one that I would use to prove it, right? But
yeah.
So what I say that to say that I don't expect this game to necessarily be a great indicator of what the rest of the season is going to be, especially knowing that there's going to be some injuries to the offensive line, especially knowing that some guys are banged up. But my expectations really, or what I'm looking for, is to see how Brock Purdy comes out, right? Because ultimately, look, winning this game is important, but it's not the most important. The most important is, can this team win a Super Bowl? And this team is going to go as far as the floor for Brock Purdy. And can Brock Purdy's played 3 games, whether or not you want to say, oh, these games weren't all bad. And it's true. He was playing really good at portions of all of those games. But can he not be the reason we lose? And I think over the last 3 games, he's played a role in why we've lost. And the games that we win, he's not making those mistakes. So that's what I'm really looking for, is what has Brock Purdy figured out to where he's not going to make these mistakes that, especially at inopportune moments, that really set the team backwards.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. My expectations is that they get back to 49er football. The 49ers, when they're at their best, they're running the ball effectively. They're stopping the run. They're disciplined. They're a very disciplined team. They're in the right moments at the right times. They're flying around making plays. It definitely seems like as the season had worn on, that the flying around had stopped. Lazy tackles started happening. They couldn't run. They couldn't stop the run. None of those things were happening. Everything that you would say, hey, this is 49er football, it all stopped happening. All of it at the same time, seemingly. So now they're in a position where you had the bye week, you get to self-scout. You got Wilkes coming down from the booth, whatever that means. You got Brock Purdy being able to assess things, and everybody being able to assess things. Where are things going wrong? And looking internally to figure out where these problems are coming from. I just expect 49er football. I don't know that it'll necessarily result in wins week in and week out. But if you're going to have a chance to win, you have to play your brand of football. And the 49ers have not been playing their brand of football. Quite frankly, I feel like they've been bullied the last few weeks. The physicality's been gone. Really, all of it went to hell in a handbasket, just like that. So I want to see this team get back to playing their brand of football and let the chips fall where they may.
And I think, what you're saying, play their brand of football. To me, it's simplifying the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, get the ball to your best players. Force feed CMC, force feed Ayuk, force feed Debo, force feed Kittle. Get the ball out of Purdy's hands quickly, like whether it be screens, crosses, all of those types of things. And on the defensive side, let your talent just cook. Like, stop with all of these fancy, stunts and, all of this like crazy pressure and all this kind of stuff. Like, Bosa said it, man. We've been a four down kind of rush team. Just now with Chase there as well. Like, let these guys just do what they do. Drop back the guys in coverage to let them, have as much personnel. And I just think that we've complicated something that's been working that hasn't been figured out. Like I don't think there's been a team that's figured us out, Jesse. It's just we've made mistakes, kind of thing. Like where a team has just been like, oh, this is the way to beat the 49ers. I don't think anybody's figured that out. It's just been the 49ers have messed up, whether it be not having, the right quarterback or making mistakes at the wrong moments, stuff like that. So that's the biggest thing. I think they just complicated things, and hopefully, like you said, they simplified and get back to just 49er football.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's a blueprint to beat every team in the league. It's about executing on that blueprint in that day and having the players to do so. Teams like Cleveland, okay, that it was a one-off. The way they played, that game was a one-off. But Minnesota, that's the one that really kind of sticks with me the most. Cincinnati's a very good team. They were the more desperate team. They were coming off a bye. I can even kind of make a pass for that. And if they go into the bye week 6-2, great. Minnesota was the one that's like, this should not happen. You got your wake-up call the week prior. You knew what was coming. Jefferson wasn't there. That was not a game that they should have lost, and they did. And that was also a team that couldn't run the ball effectively. They didn't, if you look at the overall numbers, not a lot of rushing yards, but they were very effective in the first half running the ball. That's kind of what got things going for them. And then you had the play at the end of the half, the all-out blitz that resulted in a touchdown to Addison. There was just a lot of weird things that happened in that game, and that was the one game that they really should not have lost. That was the one team they should not have lost to. That was the most disappointing one. So even though the blueprint is there to beat the 49ers, that blueprint exists for everybody. Teams like the Vikings shouldn't have the horses to get it done, and they did. The 49ers didn't impose their will. They didn't do what they've always done best, and that was unfortunate.
Well said.
By the way, his name is literally in the middle of Ramon and Raymond. It's Ramen is what it looks like. So
Ramon.
I don't know how we completely screwed it up. I might have even screwed it up again, but the way it's pronounced there is it looks like an in-between. That's awesome because we weren't going to have a chance of being right no matter what. Greenlaw, Brother Bob, actually, gosh, all these name changes. By the way, I don't know if you were here, Sunil, but he is Greenlaw. Give me my unsportsmanlike flag because I said that he's the Dre Greenlaw of the chat. He's always pressing up against a flag. That's the way that he rolls. He says, wow, did Sunil essentially admit that Kyle Shanahan isn't great?
No.
I knew that was coming. Okay, so we talked about what the expectations are coming out of the bye. What changes do you want to see coming out of the bye? Whether that's certain players playing, whether that's schematically, whether that's Wilkes coming down from the booth. I don't know. That one's a weird one. But what changes do you want to see from this team coming out of the bye? How can they execute getting back to 49er football?
I think it was a either last year or maybe 3 years. It must have been last year, Jesse. There was a stat that I would always point to that if Brandon Ayuk had at least 60 yards or at least 80 yards, the team was like 8-1 or something ridiculous where they had only lost like one time. And honestly, like I'm a big Ayuk fan. I like Ayuk better than Debo, to be honest, as far as just like a player on this team. I personally think Ayuk is the third most, like he will finish up if given the opportunity. It will be Jerry Rice. He will be somewhere in that top three for me. That's how good I think Ayuk is. And there's been some stats that are rolling around Twitter that are showing that I think he's the most open receiver out of all receivers in the league. He needs to be CMC 1. It should be Ayuk 2. Like Ayuk needs to start complaining like AJ Brown, like Devontae Adams. Like he needs to be force fed the ball. So for me, I want the offense to run through CMC and Ayuk, and defensively, I just want to see sacks. I'm tired of pressures. I want to see sacks. Like those are the two things that I think need to change. Is Ayuk needs to be utilized more, and we need to see the defensive line actually get to the quarterback instead of just seeing the PFF pressure numbers the next day. Those are the two things that I'd like to see changed.
I love it. For me, it's the missed tackles. The missed tackles have gone hand in hand with these losses. This team's traditionally been a pretty good tackling team. They have not been anything close to that the last few weeks.
What do you think that is, Jesse? I got into somebody came at me on Twitter because I put up something about Steve Wilks, and he brought back that Steve Wilks has nothing to do with the missed tackles and not finishing off the sacks, and that's all accurate. But we're talking about guys that don't usually make these mistakes, like high-level players, Fred Warner's. We're talking about Nick Bosa's. We're talking about Mooney Ward, who when we brought him into the league, it was because he was the best tackling cornerback in that the year before in Kansas City. What is it that the tackling has just gone bad? Do you point that to coaching, or is that just solely on the players?
I mean, at this stage of the game, I got to say more players than coaching. You don't do a lot of tackling in practice. You don't. That's just not the way the NFL is built anymore. You know what tackling looks like. And I would say it's coaching if they're not in the right position. So there are plays where maybe guys are out of position, but a lot of this just comes down to mano-a-mano, missed tackle, missed tackle, missed tackle. Not good form, throwing shoulders, not just, taking people down, not wrapping up. That's what it's coming down to. If people are out of position, that is coaching. All you can do as a coach is put the players in position and allow them to go make the plays. And the 49ers, more often than not, defensively, have gone out and made those plays. They haven't these last few weeks. I would say more player, but also I think that the fatigue thing and the travel thing is real. I think mental lapses are happening, and I think a lot of it does have to do with that. And I think once things start to kind of snowball, it's like a snowball rolling downhill where it's like, okay, you start to press, you're missing this tackle. Okay, now I need to go make a big play. Not only do I need to make the next tackle, but I need to try to pop the ball loose. And so now maybe you're doing some extra things and you're pressing. The 49ers just need to get back to the basics. I think it's a player thing more than a coach thing. Would you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts?
So I didn't know Mike Drop. So Mike Drop with Mansa is definitely the guy that comes at me on Twitter and holds me accountable. I didn't know he was in the show. So shout out to Mansa. I appreciate you on Twitter all the time because you definitely challenge whatever statements I make there. I don't know if you even like me because you always come at me. So it's, props to you for doing it though, because it does make me think. But here's the thing, Jesse. I agree with you. If it was just one or two players that the issue was, and if there was a trajectory of them always being shaky. But for some reason, you mentioned it earlier in the show, everybody stopped playing at the same time. Everybody started making these mistakes at the same time on one side of the ball, from captains, from people that usually never make these mistakes, Jesse. To me, it's too much of a coincidence that Mooney Ward can't tackle, Fred Warner can't tackle, Bosa can't tackle. Like, to me, that's too many people that are just too good and have never had these issues for it to just be solely on the players. Now, I know that's a hard thing to argue because you're right. Wilks isn't out there, but there's something going on underneath that's causing these mental mistakes. And to me, the mentality and getting a team prepared is on the coaching. And I wonder if they are being put in the right situations, or just because they're that good, they're making up for the lack of scheme being there but it's keeping them a half second off here or a half second. They're thinking about things they wouldn't have to think about from a better defensive coordinator, if that makes sense. And because of those extra thoughts that they're going to have, they can't just play instinctually the way that they would play. And now they're playing more thinking about whatever the scheme is or whatever different is going on right now that's causing these things to happen that way. That's what I think it's more of, because it's everybody. And the statement that I made, Jesse, is if you look at all the players that are returning from this team and you list, are they playing the same, better, or worse? How many players would be the same? How many players are playing better? How many players are playing worse? And I think if we're honest with ourselves,
across the board, they're playing worse.
Defense, yeah. So how is that just on the players, where everybody is playing worse and the coaching is not getting any kind of blame for that? There's something going on with the coaching that's causing every player to be playing below their standards.
I want to say this, though, too, and I think you make a very, very good point. If you're thinking you're not playing fast, and maybe that is a part of the issue. But I also want to talk about the decisions that the 49ers made in the offseason, where they decided to go after the big free agent, Javon Hargrave. And a part of doing so was losing guys like Jimmy Ward, who we know has been a mainstay in this defense, a big part of this defense, a big leader in this defense, playing a very important position for this defense last year. Losing guys like him, losing the depth in Amenahu and Ebukam and Willis or whoever. I don't know, whoever. The depth was lost. The 49ers coming in waves was lost because of a big signing like Javon Hargrave. And one thing that we talked about a lot during the offseason, I know it wasn't just me and you, but I heard it elsewhere, is that Javon Hargrave is not the best run defender. That's kind of what he was in Pittsburgh. Then he went to Philadelphia and turned into purely a great pass rusher. He is not the best run defender. And linebackers play their best when they can flow to the ball and not have to get the ball ran directly at them and linemen pinning them down as well. Right now, what's happening is up the middle, the 49ers are more vulnerable possibly than ever because some of the changes that have been made and losing some of that depth. And so now it's forcing linebackers and safeties, instead of flowing to the ball and kind of finishing the tackles, they're the main tacklers because running backs are breaking loose and now it's one-on-one on a regular basis, or linemen are able to get to the next level and hold Fred Warner in place and what have you. Those are the things that are happening as well. And a lot of that comes down to the players that are no longer here. Ridgeway is another player, I think, big body guy that was here last year that's not here this year. So I think that there's multiple things that we can talk about that could be leading to this for sure.
Yeah. See, the only difference is we've had 6 years of history with a lot of these same core players, and that's never been an issue. We've always had new guys come in, and this depth thing that keeps getting brought up, I don't buy it. The same play, we have the same caliber of players, just with different names. And if it's like, well, they're not performing like those other guys, like Amenahu, like Willis, like Ebukam. Well, nobody is performing the same way that they were performing under these other defensive coordinators. Like Fred Warner isn't performing the same way. Nick Bosa isn't performing the same way. So how are we going to blame it on the introduction of Javon Hargrave, who actually is performing? Like, he's been the most productive on the defensive line as far as sacks. So to me, I just think it's like this defense is too good to be looking this way, and all of a sudden it's just these players don't know how to play. Like, I think they're too classy to really say that this coach is not it for them. Like, I think we've heard it in undertones when Nick Bosa is saying, hey, we're this 4-man rush. And, Fred Warner is being, political when he's saying like, no, this is on us and all this kind of stuff. But I think in actuality, and we could see it by the moves that they're bringing him out of the box and all this kind of stuff, there is something going on with coaching that I don't know. Like it's obviously, I don't think that you lose just a Jimmy Ward and all of a sudden this defense is looking the way that it's been looking these last 3 weeks.
I was trying to find snap count percentages on the fly. That's why I'm looking down. Not really able to necessarily do it. But if I look at last year, for example, Bosa played 745 total snaps. He's on pace for almost 900 this year. My point is that last year, well, we can talk about the depth or what have you, they would go in waves. There was times, I remember early in the season, I thought to myself, is Bosa injured? Why is he not on the field? And then I started to realize, like, oh, wait, all the starting defensive linemen are out. There's 4 different defensive linemen in. And they would do that like every third series until it came down to like a crucial third down. And then they would bring some of the starters back in.
But
that
I would
rest is
argue
not there.
But I would argue that's not about the depth. That's about Wilkes wanting to use a 5-man defensive lineup. So everybody's playing more. He's not rotating 4. He's adding that 5th guy so guys aren't coming out the way that they would. Like I said, you can't compare this defense to previous defenses because it's being utilized. All these players are being utilized in a different way. They're not being utilized in the same way that the previous defensive coordinators are utilizing them. For example, they're playing man on, downs 1 and 2 when usually they play more coverage on those type of thing. They're using 5-man fronts or bringing in, a DB to do a blitz on those first 2 downs versus just having the 4-man fronts and things like that. That to me is where there's something that has changed about schematically about this defense, where it's showing up, like you're saying, Jesse, and Bosa being utilized more. I don't think it's because Farrell can't play back there or whomever else is behind them can't perform in those waves. It's just they're not utilizing it. They're being utilized in a different way. To me, that's where I think the biggest thing is. And I want to get back to my dude Mansa, who's saying that I'm just blaming it solely on the defense. It's not that. I obviously the offense is up and down as well, especially these last 3 games. But to me, the offense has always fluttered. You know what I mean? It's always been not the reason why this team has won. The defense has always been that stalwart, right? That's where, regardless of how the offense is playing, the defense is going to hold teams to under 15 points or whatever the case may be. I do think that there's issues on the offense that Kyle Shanahan needs to fix. I think he's become too stagnant, and obviously injuries are playing a role. There's more injuries on the offensive side of the ball than the defensive side of the ball. But to me, the defense just looks way different than it ever has, whereas the offense, to me, has looked like this at times, even when they're winning. They've had struggles scoring and all these types of things with Jimmy or whomever else the quarterback is what I'm trying to say. The defense looks much more out of sorts to me than what the offense is looking like comparatively.
But then my question becomes this: how do we explain the first 5 weeks of the season? I mean, I could understand if out the gates just the defense wasn't working, but it was the first 5 weeks of the season, and arguably, listen, I know that they were ran on in Minnesota and Cleveland, but they still held those teams to one of them to 19 and one of them to 22. So it's not like they just got obliterated from a point perspective. Like that's what I can't wrap my mind around is for 5 weeks, it was elite again. And then for 2 weeks, it was okay, not elite from a yardage standpoint, but still pretty good from a point standpoint. And then it all just fell apart last week. It was over. But that's what I don't understand is if it was bad out the gate, okay, I get it. But that wasn't the case. So clearly the scheme was fine through the first 5 weeks. We do know that travel definitely crept up on them. Maybe that does play a part in this, like I talked about earlier. But a part of wearing down with travel and short week games and all that is not having the depth anymore. It's hard
to me,
for me
Jesse,
to say that
I look at it like
the first 5 weeks. That's what I can't wrap my mind
around.
I
was tweeting in the first 5 weeks that Wilkes is being carried by the talent more than Brock Purdy is on the other side of the ball. And I think more and more, I remember when we first started talking about Wilkes, I looked at his defense when he was defensive coordinator, and he's never had a really good defense. And I think that he doesn't know what to do with this talent. And I think that in the first 5 weeks, the talent was able to overcome maybe some bad scheming and things of that nature. But now offenses are catching on to the bad schemes and maybe utilizing or figuring out how to attack those type of scheme now, and are taking advantage of plays. I don't know. I don't know X's and O's like that, and I don't want to claim to be a specialist at this, but the eye test shows me that there's something off. And when you listen to guys like Richard Sherman, who definitely does know schemes and definitely does know defenses, he's looking at Wilkes saying, you're not doing the right thing. You know, when you look at Ancho, who also played on the defensive side of the ball, take Ancho with a grain of salt. He's not necessarily, the guy, but he's also pointing to Wilkes and schematics and things like that. It seems like the people in the know, Jesse, players that are looking at this 49ers defense, they're not pointing the finger at the players. They're pointing the finger at Wilkes. So there's got to be something there. To me, and I hope it gets figured out after the bye.
Yeah, I mean, how much of that? I think it's tough though too, because how much of what Wilkes is doing is mandated by Shanahan? I think there's a reason that Fangio wasn't here. On paper, Fangio, Wilkes. Fangio is a better defensive coordinator. We knew that, but Fangio does his own thing and runs his own thing. And we pretty much called it in the offseason. They're likely not going to go with Fangio because that's just not going to work with Shanahan. He wants to keep the nuts and bolts of this defense in place. Wilkes might be able to execute that. So how much of it, though, is maybe the scheme staying the same? It just doesn't fit necessarily fully what he wants to do. And so there's a little bit of that struggle. I don't know, man. The defense definitely has struggled. We're only talking about half of it. Obviously, the offense has struggles of their own.
Sure.
The whole team fell apart really almost for a 3-week time span. Brock Purdy played his worst football. CMC played his worst football. The offensive line played their worst football. The defense played their worst football. This was a whole team meltdown once the Browns game came.
Yeah, and I mean,
I don't know.
I know people are going to take this, he's KP for Kyle Shanahan. Look, no, to me, I've always been critical of the inability to score, to put together a full game on the offense, right? Their inability to score in the first half of games, only being a second half team. That does go back to Kyle Shanahan and some of the way that he kind of uses the beginning of the game to figure out how to play call in the second half of games. However, when you look at the defense and you look at the offense, I can point to more significant injuries on the offensive side of the ball. Aaron Banks, Trent Williams, Debo. These are extremely important players on the offensive side that are missing that you could maybe point to, okay, that's why the offense is sputtering or not.
I don't think Aaron Banks has missed a game yet. I think this is going to be his first game missed. Pretty sure.
I thought he was out one of the games. He got injured mid-game.
Maybe he got injured.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or whatever,
and then like CMC missed the game. CMC was like in and out of games as well. So still not an excuse. This team is stacked enough to where they still shouldn't be struggling to score 20 plus points every single game. But on the defensive side, there aren't those excuses, is what I'm saying. You can't point to, at least Fred Warner was out, or Bosa was injured, or, Mooney Ward was out. There aren't those type of excuses where they're more easily those type of excuses on the offensive side. Ultimately, it's not about who's at fault, all this kind of stuff. Ultimately, we're looking for this team to win a Super Bowl. They aren't a Super Bowl caliber team based off of the last 3 weeks, and a lot has to change. But I just started on the defensive side.
No, I want to argue more. I'm going to blame you. It's your fault today. Brother Bob says, if Kyle is great, why does Ayuk have to do something.
I'm not saying Ayuk has to do something. I'm saying Kyle needs to force feed him the ball more.
Yeah, that's what I took out of it. Crow says, Kruger laughed at me last time I asked this question. Can you tell me why a 4-point stance wouldn't help with stopping the run? I want to learn interior D-line only. I mean, I think what it comes down to is, yeah, and I think that's where he's going is lower man wins, right? You're taught that from a young age. I think it just comes down to what players are comfortable with, what they want to do. Most players prefer to rush out of a 3-point stance. Obviously, edges, sometimes even out of a 2-point stance. It comes down to what that player is comfortable with. If you're not comfortable rushing out of a 4-point stance, and that's not the way that you want to rush, then probably not the way to go, But I understand what you're saying as far as low man wins. I don't think that a 4-point stance is necessarily going to fix any issues when it comes to this run defense. I don't see it personally. Plus, I think that it might put you out of position in the pass defense. So, Brother Bob says, isn't that true about
offense?
Isn't that offense? Okay, offense true. Purdy equals mid on Kyle Shanahan.
Look, the criticism about Kyle Shanahan not finding a franchise quarterback in the 7 years that he's been here. There's no argument against that to me. But I will say that every quarterback that has been on the field, he's gotten the best. And you can see that in like all the quarterbacks that have left Kyle Shanahan's system and went to another system have not looked the same. Most recent case in point, Jimmy G.
Yeah, but the EPA, he had a good EPA, I thought. So he was a good quarterback. That's not how that works? Okay. G8 Garage says Wilkes is coaching this defense like the Panthers D, and the 49ers are way more talented, and they are thrown off, in my opinion. Maybe. I don't know that he has that much autonomy. I think he's coaching it the way Kyle wants him to coach it. Crow says for Wilkes, it will feel familiar and improve communication between players and the coordinator, and he is weathering the storm next to the players, then secluded in a comfy box, out of touch boss versus a boss going through it. I mean, how many coordinators in this league call plays from the booth? It's not unique to Wilkes. I don't. Here's what I'll say. One observation piece that I had, and maybe this will help Wilkes, but one observation I had when I was at training camp, Kyle Shanahan is almost non-communicative at all with any of the players. He doesn't talk to them at all. He just walks around. I'll tell you Kyle Shanahan's practice. This is the whole thing. Get out onto the field. He kind of walks around between the two fields, watching things go down. Then John Lynch would come over. They would shoot the shit. Then his son would come over. They would play some catch. Then his dad would come over and they would talk a little bit. Then he'd go onto the field to throw a few picks to the defense. And then he would get his headset on and he would call his plays, and that was it. They would go through position drills. They would go through one-on-one drills, everything. Kyle Shanahan was just doing whatever, not coaching anybody in the moment. Steve Wilkes, on the other hand, would be there right after every single one-on-one drill they had. He'd pull somebody aside. He would coach them up. So maybe for Wilkes being a hands-on teacher, maybe that will help him. But if we're like talking about who Kyle Shanahan on the sidelines, he's next to his players, but shit, somebody gets injured and he's like buried in his playbook or his play sheet. So you can be there, but that's not going to necessarily connect the dots. And there are a lot of coaches that coach in the booth and they do it effectively. So I don't know.
Yeah, but it also is different for this team, right? So it's a complete different shift when it comes to how the previous defensive coordinators were. They were sideline guys. They were rah guys. They were guys that were, in the players' faces, dapping them up after great plays, all that kind of stuff. So it is a big shift from that. But ultimately, look, Kyle Shanahan has had pretty much 100% batting average when it came to the coaches that he brought in. right? Every coach, every
But they were all promoted
promotion.
within. He ran
Yeah,
out of those
every promotion.
promotions, right?
Well, I don't know. I think, when we were talking about defensive coaches, Daniel Bullock was my number one choice, right? It seemed like it would be a natural transition, but he brought somebody from the outside in, and whether you say it works or not, obviously there's a whole rest of the season to decide, but usually those are seamless fits. Anthony Lynn, seamless fit. Brian Greasy, seamless fit. However, there obviously we haven't had this much confusion with the coach ever in Kyle Shanahan's kind of tenure here, which I think is saying something.
A lot of that comes from the continuity of promoting within on a regular
Mm-hmm.
basis, and they didn't do that. And who knows what the case is with Bullock. Maybe he doesn't want to be a defensive coordinator. Maybe the conversation was had and he's like, I'm cool. Like I'm good where I'm at. I don't want to be that guy. It's also a possibility. That's been the case, Eric. So maybe that's here as well. But either way, I mean, again, communication issues, not being on the sideline, and out of touch boss, like all these things would make sense if it was bad from the beginning. And again, Shanahan know all of these things going into the season. He knew what Wilkes was and wasn't comfortable with, and he hired him anyways. He knew that he wanted to coach from the box, and he hired him anyways. Like, these are not things that just crept up all of a sudden in week 6, and we're like, oh my God, he's coaching from the box. Oh, he wants to run something different than what we expected. No, they just became glaring issues all of a sudden because they were losing, but it was all good through 5 weeks. Nobody complained about the booth in week 1 through 5. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. Maybe that's the change that they need, but I'm not convinced that. To me, it seems like they're grasping at straws, and if the defense turns it around, they were going to turn it around whether he's in the booth or he's on the sidelines. I don't think that's going to make a difference. Brother Bob says, so it's okay for the offense to be shaking, not the defense. Wow.
What?
I don't think he said that.
You're reaching, right? Brother Bob must be doing yoga out there in Miami right now, the way he's reaching for these comments right now.
He says, so Kyle needs to coach and force feed Ayuk. Kyle Shanahan equals mid.
I ain't go. Hey, Brother Bob, I ain't go fall for it, bro. I know what you're trying to do. It's not gonna work.
Yeah, he's trying to get you the okie doke. Cryptic says the Niners have had 3-5 season and a 2-4 season. What's the difference from this 3-game losing streak with our teams compared to those last 2 seasons? I think for me, the difference is this team knew that they had those losing streaks. This team also talked about not having those losing streaks in depth going into this season. This team talked about the number 1 seed. This team seemed more aware than ever that the recipe to winning a Super Bowl is not going through the path they went the last 2 years where they come out of the bye week and every game matters. And you get worn down towards the end of the season and attrition starts to kick in and you lose in an NFC championship 2 years in a row. This team, this team talked about the number 1 seed being so important to them. Kyle Shanahan talked about it. Debo talked about it. Other players talked about it. However, they've fallen right back into the same trap. And now the number 1 seed isn't completely out of the realm of possibility. But in order to get the number 1 seed, I believe they're going to have to go 7-2 down the stretch and beat Philadelphia. And if either of those things don't happen, if they go 6-3 or they go 7-2 and lose to Philly, I don't believe that they're getting the number 1 seed. And even then, that still might not be enough because you've got the Detroit Lions with a very, very easy schedule down the stretch. They may only have 2 more losses on that schedule, which means 7-2 and beating Philly might not get it done. It just might get you ahead of Philly. So we'll see.
I think for me, like those 3-5 and 2-4 seasons, the teams were so up and down. Like it wasn't like they were dominant in any facet. Whereas the first 5 games, it was a foregone fact that the Super Bowl was going through the 49ers. Like they were the best team in the league consistently, right? They were top 5 in offense and defense. They were manhandling teams, scoring 30 plus points every single game. Defense was getting turnovers, holding teams. I think they were only giving up like under 15 points per game. And then all of a sudden it just fell off of a cliff. And the eye test makes the team look way different. That's, I think, why this is a little bit more of a red flag or more scary. And it's just not like, oh, this is just what they do kind of thing before the bye week. It seemed like they could have been, 8-0 at this time based off of how they played those first 5 games. And look, Jesse, something happened after that Cowboys game, because that's where everything changed as far as the level of focus. And even though it's a 3-game losing streak, they were in all 3 of those games, and a couple of different mental errors, I think, led to them not winning. Like obviously missing a field goal at the end of the Cleveland game, we're not talking about that game as a loss. In the Vikings game, they had every opportunity to win that game as well. And even in the Cincinnati game, they had every opportunity to win that game as well. So it's not like this team is that far off. And I think that's what's even more frustrating, is that it's us that's the issue, not that we're just being outmatched and outplayed, which it kind of felt like maybe in some of those other years.
Also, I do want to bring this to the stand if Wilks is on trial. Somebody mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to actually go through the games here. DeMeco Ryans, I would argue, his tenure started off way more rocky than Wilks did. Remember when people were calling for his head? Probably not, because now he's a really good head coach in this league, and people forget very easily. But their first 8 games with DeMeco Ryans as defensive coordinator went like this. First of all, they started out 4-4. They gave up 33 points, 11 points, 30 points, 28 points, 17 points, 30 points, 22 points, and 31 points. They also gave up, you ready for this? This is their rushing yards given up in those first 8 games. 116 rushing yards, 151 rushing yards, 100 rushing yards, 105 rushing yards, 94 rushing yards, 148 rushing yards, 176 rushing yards, 163 rushing yards. Then from that point on, after those games that I mentioned where they gave up all those points, they lost half of them and gave up a ton of rushing yards, the defense turned it around completely. They started giving up rushing yards in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s throughout almost the whole rest of the season outside of one game. So let's not forget that it started out very shaky. I would argue more shaky with DeMeco Ryans, who did come from within this team and was promoted within house, than it has with Steve Wilks.
Yeah, but I think the overall sentiment is much different with this team, in the sense like you weren't hearing players kind of say the things that they've been saying in interviews and stuff like that. So to me, that's where it's a little bit more troublesome in my books.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, also, I don't remember everything that was said during that time. I mean, maybe things were said. Who knows?
Maybe, yeah.
Brother Bob says, can't blame Kyle Shanahan for a shaky offense mid Brock Purdy hiring Wilks. I mean,
I think we put the blame on Kyle Shanahan. Look, Brother Bob, is your point that Kyle Shanahan is a terrible coach? Like, what is your argument? Like, to me, I think I could make a lot of arguments why Kyle Shanahan is one of the best coaches in the league. You want to pinpoint things, and is your point that you think we should get another coach? Then say that, man. Like, I think I'm fair with my criticisms of Kyle Shanahan. I just am a big fan of him as well.
Yeah, and I see your point. They lost to PJ Walker, but let's not forget that the last loss in that streak that I just read was to the Arizona Cardinals. Remember who was playing quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals that week? Because it wasn't Kyler Murray, and they gave up 163 rushing yards and 31 points to the Arizona Cardinals. So I really think that you could argue the first 8 games for DeMeco was worse. I'm not going to argue. I'm going to say it was worse. Just statistically looking at it, it was certainly worse. It definitely was worse. So, all right, we got to that one. Okay, let's see here. Here's a positive. Chase Young was traded for and is on the San Francisco 49ers now. I think most of us wanted, whether they can get an offensive lineman, which was unlikely to happen, or they would get a secondary piece, a corner. That was ideal. But when you can bring in a guy like Chase Young, who's a very good player, was the second overall pick in an NFL draft just a couple of years ago, I think you jump at the chance to do that. And the 49ers certainly did. What do you think his impact on this team will be?
I mean, depending on what the scheme is going to be, I think that if it was just what we usually do, 4-man rush, it's going to be dominant. He's going to either get a lot of one-on-ones, which I think he's going to eat up and have a great season, or it's going to free up some other guys, whether it be Bosa, Hargrave, Armstead. Like, to me, they have four players now, Jesse, that are really tough to defend one-on-one, right? And that's something that I don't think we've had since Buckner was on the team, right? So to me, I think that it could make a huge, huge difference. It's just about whether and how quick he gets to gelling with the team, and if the scheme allows them to do what they are capable of doing.
I like this move not because Chase Young is talented, and he certainly is. Obviously, that is a reason to like the move. But one thing I was talking about earlier was the depth. And now you've got guys like Farrell and Gregory being the second wave. If you need to give a bit of rest to a Nick Bosa or a Chase Young, you can do so pretty comfortably, to where before it was one of them was starting, the other one's coming off the bench, and then you got Drake Jackson there, who has just not been very good at all. Now he's hurt. I mean, who knows? In 2 weeks, he may not even be suiting up for this team. They may just put him on IR or kick him to the practice squad. I'm not really sure what's going to happen with him. But right now, you're pushing everybody just one step further down the depth chart, which means that depth starts to come back for this team. And I do think that depth has been sorely missed. So I love Chase Young. I think he is talented. I don't know how much he helps in the run game necessarily, but pushing everybody down one peg in the depth chart, I think, is always a good thing, because there are some talented players now in that wave too that you can use and use effectively. So that's where I like this mostly for Chase Young.
Yeah, I mean, think about it, Jesse. In the offseason, we were talking about, man, Chase Young would be awesome. Should they make the move? All that to get him for a compensatory third-round pick, which, we know that they are terrible drafting in the third round. For the most part, they're not going to get a better player than Chase Young for that third-round pick.
Yeah, it's and I'll tell you this, the Jaguars, who the 49ers are facing this week, they desperately needed a pass rusher. And if they could have gotten Chase Young for that deal, they would have been ecstatic. Mm-hmm. Some of those guys, I was talking to the content creators yesterday, they were like, we're so desperate for a pass rusher. Some of us were talking about being willing to give up a first rounder for Chase Young. That's how bad they wanted a pass rusher there. So for the 49ers to get him for a compensatory third round pick, that's incredible.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Brother Bob says he's not great. Your stat about bye weeks is telling.
Brother Bob, right after that, I talked about how he's won 63% of the games after a bye as well. I just talked about the one game after the bye week. He's also been a coach in 3 of the last 4 NFC championship games and completely changed around a trash culture that the 49ers have within 3 years and made it to the Super Bowl. So you could pick and choose what. I don't know if he's not great. That's kind of crazy. Like, this trash coach that somehow has made it to 3 out of the last 4 NFC championship games. You're right. It's that bye week stat that really is the dot on your exclamation mark.
I like it. Brother Bob. Brother Bob. Yeah, he's back. He's fully back. I got Sunil back. I enjoyed this. Before I get out of here, though, I do want to say if you have seen in the background the Glance LED going through my favorite teams, their upcoming games, score predictions, all that other stuff, you can have it show standings. You can have it show stocks, weather. You can customize it. It also shows the stats of the YouTube channel, which appreciate y'all. You guys are killing it, subbing up. Greatly appreciate that. But Glance LED, link is in the description. They are a sponsor of the channel. You can go pick up one of your own. It comes in 3 different sizes, 2 different colors, and you can get 10% off with the promo code LSS. Check them out if you have a man cave or an office. I highly, highly recommend one of these. This thing is awesome. Appreciate y'all in the chat. Brother Bob coming back and says, Sunil, you think Kyle is good as Walsh or his dad? Oh, okay. All right. Jeez. You went straight to Hall of Fame. Well,
yeah,
okay,
it's like,
yeah.
Oh, Sunil, you think he's great. Do you think he's as great as the greatest coach of all time? I'm not. I never said that. That's the thing. There's a big difference between being a great coach and being the greatest of all time. And then he says the next one. I never said. You said he's not that good. I think he's really good. Do I think that? Does that mean he's Walsh? No, I don't think. I don't think he's necessarily Walsh, and he hasn't proven even to be as good as his dad. But to say that he's not that good, I think is a crazy statement.
49ers minded. It's a company called Glance LED. The link's in the description. You can check it out there. Appreciate you, brother. Good to see you in here. All right, y'all. Listen, I'm going to get out of here. Tomorrow, we're supposed to do a show over on Vish's channel with Vish, myself, and Larry, our weekly roundtable. But I don't know if it's going to happen only because Vish may not be able to. So if that's the case, I might have another show here, either a call-in show or I might have the coach on. We'll see. But one way or another, I will be live tomorrow night. We'll just figure out exactly when, where, and with who. Keep your eyes peeled. Appreciate y'all. Much love. Sunil, glad you are back. Loved doing another show with you, man. And we'll be back to our regularly scheduled program. Unless somebody needs to shift, then we'll kick you out of your spot. All right, y'all. Stay blessed. Peace.